The Xerion scout vessel Emerald Tides drifted through the void, its bioluminescent hull pulsing with slow, rhythmic breaths of yellow-green energy. Commander Xerwind watched the distant blue-green world on the observation screen, his emerald scales rippling with unease. The planet Earth was an anomaly, a young species, barely interstellar, yet already fracturing the galaxy's careful balance. His sensory tendrils twitched as the ship's organic scanners fed him data. The humans were reckless, chaotic. They waged war upon themselves with a ferocity that bordered on madness. Their weapons were crude, ballistics, fission devices, chemical explosives. Nothing the Xerion Ascendancy hadn't seen before. And yet, Commander, Scientist Ursik murmured, her voice a soft chime of bioluminescent resonance. Their energy signatures, they don't match known patterns. Xerwind flexed his claws against the living metal of the command console. The humans should have been predictable. Their technology was primitive, their tactics transparent. But something in their electromagnetic noise was wrong. It wasn't just the jagged spikes of radio transmissions or the erratic bursts of primitive fusion tests. It was the pattern. Too many signals. Too much variation. Ursik's frills flared in alarm as the scanners resolved a new anomaly. Their orbital defenses. Xerwind's breath stilled. Human satellites weren't just passive observers. They were armed, not with the elegant photosynthetic plasma lances of Xerion design, but with crude, brutal kinetic rods, tungsten spears waiting to be hurled at relativistic speeds, and beneath them, scattered across the planet's surface, thermal blooms flickered in erratic clusters. Not cities, not industry. Missile silos. Xerwind's secondary heart pulsed faster. The humans hadn't just built weapons. They had built redundancies, layers upon layers of them. Every continent, every ocean, every mountain range, littered with launch systems, each capable of ending civilizations. And then the scanners found the ships. Not the fragile, half-built exploratory vessels the Ascendancy's analysts had predicted. No, these were warships, ugly, asymmetrical, their hulls layered with ablative plating and studded with weapon ports. Railgun batteries, point defense clusters, missile tubes stacked like the teeth of some ancient predator. Ursik's bioluminescence dimmed. This is impossible. Their last observed technological baseline was decades behind this. Xerwind exhaled slowly, his tendrils coiling tight. The humans hadn't just advanced, they had leapt, skipped entire generations of warfare in a single bound. And worse, they had done it alone, no guidance, no oversight, just raw, unfiltered ingenuity. A warning chime pulsed through the Emerald Tide's neural web. A human vessel, designation UN's Vanguard, had altered course. Intercept trajectory. Xerwind's claws flexed. Protocol demanded. First contact. Diplomacy. Cultural exchange. But as the human warship's engines flared, not the clean photosynthetic burn of Xerion drives, but the roar of primitive, uncontrolled fusion, he understood one terrible truth. The galaxy had made a mistake. It had underestimated humanity. The UNS Vanguard filled the viewport like a blade unsheathed in the dark. Xerwind's neural tendrils pulsed with instinctive unease. The human ship was wrong, not in design, but in philosophy. Xerion vessels grew, their structures woven from photosynthetic alloys, their energy pathways pulsing with the steady rhythm of living systems. They curved, flowed, breathed. The Vanguard did none of those things. It was angular, brutal. Every surface honed for function, not form. Its armor plating wasn't grown. It was forged, hammered into existence by hands that cared nothing for elegance, only endurance. The ship's engines burned blue, white, a contained star raging against the void, and Xerwind could almost feel the heat of it through the screen. The raw, untamed power that no living drive should ever produce. Ersik's bioluminescent patterns flickered in erratic waves. Their energy signature, it's chaotic. No stabilization nodes, no dampeners, just thrust. Xerwind's claws flexed against the command console. The humans hadn't just built a ship. They had built a statement. A proximity alert chimed. The Vanguard had entered hailing range. Protocol dictated a formal first contact, bioluminescent glyphs of peace, harmonic resonance pulses to convey goodwill. Xerwind hesitated. Would the humans even recognize such subtleties? Or would they mistake elegance for weakness? Before he could decide, the Vanguard spoke. Not with glyphs, not with resonance. A single railgun round, depleted uranium, hyper-accelerated, sliced through the void. It missed the emerald tides by less than a kilometer. A calculated near impact, close enough to send tremors through the ship's organic hull. Ersik recoiled, his frills flattening in shock. They fired on us? Xerwind's neural tendrils coiled tight. A greeting. The humans hadn't missed. They had aimed. A transmission crackled through the comms. Raw, unfiltered, devoid of the harmonic layers Xerion communication relied upon. Just a voice. A human voice. Xerion vessel. This is Major Vala of the United Nations Stellar Navy. Apologies for the abrupt introduction. A pause. A laugh. We find it's best to establish boundaries early. Xerwind exhaled slowly. Boundaries, not aggression, not submission, a test. And he had failed it. The humans had revealed their nature in that single shot. They did not ask for respect. They took it. Ersik's bioluminescence dimmed to a wary ember. They're insane. No species initiates contact with a weapon. Xerwind studied the Vanguard. Its gun still hot, its posture unyielding, and that was far more dangerous. Xerwind's neural tendrils pulsed with residual tension, the bioelectric feedback making his limbs feel heavy. The human warship, Vanguard, loomed in the viewport, its angular hull, a stark contrast to the Xerion vessel's flowing, organic curves. Where his ship breathed with the slow rhythm of photosynthetic energy, the human construct was a blade forged in the cold fires of void warfare. Ersik's frills remained flattened, his bioluminescence flickering erratically. They fired, he repeated, as if the concept alone was a violation of some universal law. Xerwind exhaled through his secondary vents, forcing his body to cycle the tension out. The humans had not attacked, they had communicated, and in doing so, they had exposed the flaw in Xerion doctrine, the assumption that all species sought harmony before strength. The calm crackled again, the human voice, Major Vala, carrying none of the layered harmonics Xerion's speech relied upon, unfiltered. Xerwind, was it? A pause. We've got a cultural liaison prepped. Sergeant Webb, hell be your point of contact. Ersik's frills twitched. They're assigning a warrior as a diplomat? Xerwind didn't answer. He was too busy studying the data feed from the Vanguard's initial scan. The humans had not just fired a warning shot. They had broadcast the weapon specifications in the same pulse, projectile composition, a challenge, an invitation, and perhaps most unsettling of all, trust Sergeant Daniel Webb was not what Xerwind expected. The human stood in the docking bay, his posture relaxed, but his eyes sharp, scanning the Xerion delegation with the same detached efficiency as a predator assessing prey. His uniform was a dull, matte black, devoid of the bioluminescent trappings Xerion officers wore. Only the insignia on his shoulder marked him as anything other than a common soldier. Ersik's frills twitched again. You are their diplomat. Webb's lips curled, not in the Xerion gesture of submission, but in something else, amusement. Diplomat's a fancy word for guy who explains why we're not actually insane. Xerwind's neural tendrils coiled. The human's voice carried no harmonics, no subtext, just blunt, unfiltered, meaning it was exhausting. The cultural exchange began with a simple gesture. Humans called it a handshake. Webb extended his limb, palm open. Xerwind hesitated, then mirrored the motion, his own appendage meeting the humans. The contact was brief. Webb's skin was warm, dry. Nothing like the slick, photosynthetic membrane of a Xerion. And yet, the grip was firm, unyielding. Ursik watched, his bioluminescence dimmed to a wary glow. This is how they establish trust, through physical dominance. Webb chuckled. Nah, it's just how we say hello. Xerwind's neural tendrils pulsed. He was beginning to understand. The humans did not ask for respect. They took it, and in doing so, they gave it freely in return. The revelation came later, in the quiet hum of the Vanguard's mess hall. Webb sat across from Xerwind, a steaming cup of something dark and bitter in his hands. You ever wonder why we fired first? Xerwind's frills flexed. I assumed it was a demonstration of power. Webb took a slow sip. Nope, it was a test. Webb's gaze locked onto his, to see if you'd shoot back. Xerwind's neural tendrils went still. The humans had not been asserting dominance. They had been measuring them, and Xerwind realized, with a cold, creeping certainty, that he had no idea what the measurement had revealed. Ursik found him later, his bioluminescence flickering with agitation. They are barbaric. No civilized species communicates through violence. Xerwind exhaled slowly, watching the Vanguard through the viewport. No, he murmured. They communicate through certainty, and that, he knew, was far more dangerous. The Vanguard hung in the void like a silent predator, its angular hull drinking in the starlight. Xerwind watched it from the observation deck of his own vessel, his neural tendrils twitching with unease. The humans had extended an invitation, an exchange of cultural artifacts. They called it a gesture of goodwill. Ursik stood beside him, his bioluminescent patterns pulsing in erratic bursts of emerald and lime. This is reckless, he hissed, his voice a whisper of organic static. Their technology is crude. Their understanding of biosymbiotic systems is non-existent. What could they possibly offer that we do not already possess? Xerwind didn't answer. He had seen the way the humans moved, like creatures who had clawed their way up from the dirt and refused to forget it. There was no arrogance in their posture, only the quiet confidence of something that had survived against impossible odds. The airlock cycled with a hiss, and Major Vala stepped through, flanked by Sergeant Webb. She carried a small, unassuming case in her hands, its surface matte black and devoid of ornamentation. Ursik's frills flared in disdain. Is this your offering, a primitive storage container? Vala's lips twitched, not a smile, something sharper. Not the container, what's inside? She set the case on the nearest mechanical interface, a living console of woven organic fibers that pulsed with yellow-green energy. The Xerion systems reacted immediately, tendrils of luminescent vine curling toward the foreign object, scanning, probing. Then the console screamed. Ursik recoiled as the entire chamber flickered, the photosynthetic power cells dimming as if drained. The scanner feeds erupted in a storm of corrupted data, fractal patterns spiraling across every display. The vines recoiled, their glow sputtering like dying embers. What is this? Ursik's voice was a strangled rasp. Vala didn't move. A gift. Webb stepped forward, his expression unreadable. We call it a paradox core. A little something we dug up on Mars. Xerwind's neural tendrils went rigid. A graveyard, and yet the humans had pulled something from its bones that made living technology writhe. The case hissed open. Inside lay a sphere of perfect darkness, its surface swallowing the light. Not a material, not a substance, an absence. The Xerion scanners shrieked again, their organic matrices overloading as they tried, and failed, to parse what they were seeing. Ursik staggered back, his bioluminescence flaring in panic. This is impossible. No species has ever. Vala cut him off. We didn't build it, we found it. Her gaze locked onto Xerwind's, but we understood it. The silence that followed was heavier than gravity. Xerwind exhaled slowly, his frills pressing flat against his skull. The humans had not come to intimidate. They had not come to boast. They had come to show them something. And as the paradox core hummed in its cradle, warping reality in a way no living machine should comprehend, Xerwind realized the truth. The galaxy had always measured civilizations by their technology. By their mastery of the known, the humans measured themselves by what they could survive, and that changed everything. The Xerion mess hall pulsed with muted yellow-green light, the walls alive with the slow, rhythmic breathing of photosynthetic membranes. The air carried the scent of something between ozone and crushed leaves, a sterile, alien aroma that made Sergeant Daniel Webb's nose itch. He sat at a table that wasn't quite a table, more a living extrusion of the ship itself, its surface warm and slightly yielding under his palms. Across from him, Ursek's bioluminescent frills flickered in what Webb had learned was the Xerion equivalent of nervous excitement. The scientist's long, segmented fingers hovered over a tray of what looked like translucent jellyfish, their surfaces shimmering with internal currents of emerald and amber. "You must try this," Ursek insisted, his voice a resonant hum, a delicacy. "The finest nutrient concentrate from our homeworld's deepest bioreactors." Webb hesitated. Next to him, Major Vala gave him a look that said, "Don't you dare." But the challenge was already in the air. The Xerion crew watched, their postures subtly shifting, expectant, testing. Humans had a reputation. He picked up the offered utensil, a curved organic prong that flexed like cartilage, and speared one of the quivering morsels. The moment it touched his tongue, his entire nervous system lit up in revolt. It wasn't the taste, though. That was bad enough. A cloying, fermented sweetness that clung like syrup. It was the texture, the way it moved in his mouth, as if alive tendrils of gelatinous matter writhing against his palate. His stomach clenched, his jaw locked, but he chewed and swallowed. Ursek's frills flared wide, his ocular membranes dilating in shock. Around them, the Xerion crew erupted in a chorus of pulsed bioluminescence, their colors shifting rapidly through lime and emerald. Disbelief. Awe. You consumed it?" Ursek stammered. Webb wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, forcing his expression into something resembling neutrality. "Yeah, not bad." A lie so bold it bordered on performance art. Vala's lips twitched. Ursek turned to Xerwind, who had been observing from the periphery, his posture rigid with command. "They do not even react," the scientist murmured. Xerwind's spines flexed, his gaze locked onto Webb. The human had just done something impossible. Because Xerion nutrient concentrates weren't food, they were poison. Ursek's delicacy was laced with neurotoxic alkaloids, potent enough to liquefy the nervous system of any known species. The Xerion themselves could only ingest it after weeks of enzymatic preparation, their biology painstakingly adapted over millennia to tolerate its lethality. And Webb had eaten it like it was nothing. The silence stretched. Then, from the back of the mess hall, a low, pulsing chime, a sound Webb had never heard before, a sound no human had ever elicited from a Xerion. Xerwind exhaled, his frills settling into a slow, deliberate ripple. "Your species," he said at last, "does not merely endure. You consume adversity." Webb grinned. "Yeah, and we ask for seconds." The mess hall erupted in another wave of bioluminescent shock. Vala leaned in, her voice barely audible. "You're insane," Webb shrugged. "Nah, just human." And as the Xerion crew stared at him with something between horror and fascination, he reached for another serving. Because sometimes, the most powerful weapon wasn't a gun or a ship. It was a stomach of steel. The Xerion observation deck pulsed with ambient yellow-green light, the organic walls breathing in time with the ship's photosynthetic energy cycles. Xerwind stood at the viewport, his emerald frills twitching in agitation as he watched the human contingent below. They were dancing, at least. That was the closest approximation his translator could provide. The movements were too chaotic to be ritual, too coordinated to be random. Limbs lashed out in sharp arcs, bodies twisted with controlled violence, feet stamped in rhythms that sent vibrations through the deck plating. The humans called it training, but to Xerwind's eyes, it looked like a war chant given physical form. Ursek's bioluminescent veins flickered with unease beside him. They do this, voluntarily. Xerwind's secondary eyelids nictitated. They claim it hones reflexes. Ursek's tendrils coiled tight. It looks like they are preparing to dismantle the universe with their bare hands. Xerwind couldn't disagree. The humans moved like a single organism, their synchronization uncanny. Sergeant Webb led the exercise. His motions fluid yet brutal. Every strike carrying the weight of a creature that had evolved not just to survive, but to dominate. His muscles coiled and released with terrifying efficiency, his breath steady even as sweat slicked his skin. One of the younger humans, a recruit barely out of training, overextended. His foot slipped on the deck's slightly damp surface, a byproduct of the Xerion's humidity systems, and he stumbled. Xerwind's frills stiffened. In Xerion culture, such a lapse in group cohesion would have been met with immediate censure, a demotion at minimum. Hierarchy was everything. Precision was law, but Webb didn't reprimand the recruit. He laughed, a sharp barking sound that made Ursek flinch. Then, without hesitation, Webb reached down, hauled the recruit up by his forearm, and clapped him on the shoulder. The other humans didn't scorn the mistake, they adjusted. Their formation shifted seamlessly, compensating for the recruit's momentary lapse as if it were nothing more than a ripple in water. Ursek's bioluminescence dimmed in confusion. They do not punish error? Xerwind exhaled, his frills rippling slow. No, they learn from it. The realization settled over him like a weight. This wasn't just training, it was adaptation. The humans didn't fear mistakes. They expected them. They didn't demand perfection. They built systems that accounted for failure and turned it into strength. Their movements weren't rigid like Xerion drill patterns. They were alive, evolving in real time, a living testament to a species that had clawed its way up from the dirt of a death world by being too stubborn to break. The music started, a rhythmic, pounding beat, all bass and primal energy, thrumming through the deck. The humans' movements shifted, their strikes sinking to the tempo, their footwork becoming sharper. Faster. Webb grinned, teeth bared in something that was not quite a smile. Now we're getting somewhere. Ursek's tendrils quivered. They soundtracked their combat drills. Xerwind could only watch, transfixed, as the humans moved like a storm-given flesh. And for the first time in his life, he understood true fear. Not of their weapons, not of their technology, but of the mindset that had birthed them. A species that turned war into a dance was not one to be trifled with. The observation deck hummed with the residual energy of the human drill, the air still vibrating with the echoes of their war. Dance Xerwind's bioluminescent veins pulsed erratically, his neural tendrils flickering in agitation as he processed what he had just witnessed. The humans had finished their display, their bodies slick with exertion, their breathing steady despite the brutality of their movements. They didn't collapse. They didn't falter. They simply stopped, as if flipping a switch between war and peace. Ursek's fronds twitched in distress, his voice barely above a whisper. They treat combat like an art form. Xerwind didn't answer. His gaze was locked on the human commander, Major Vala. As she approached, her posture relaxed, but her eyes sharp, calculating. She carried herself like a predator who had decided, for now, to sheath her claws. "You fight like you were born for it," Xerwind finally said, his vocal sac resonating with reluctant admiration. Vala tilted her head, considering. "We weren't born for it, we chose it." A silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken implications. Then, with a gesture that was almost casual, she motioned toward the far end of the deck, where a massive dormant structure stood, a relic from an older war, its surface scarred but intact. "That," she said, "is what happens when we stop dancing." The structure was a ship's engine, or what remained of one. Its hull was pockmarked with plasma burns, its once sleek lines warped from catastrophic stress. But what struck Xerwind most was the insignia still visible beneath the damage. The interwoven sigils of 3 different species, fused together in a pact of mutual destruction. Ursek drifted closer, his tendrils extending in fascination. This is Xerion alloy and Vecthar crystalline lattice, and, he hesitated. Human composite plating. Vala nodded. The olive branch, first joint warship of the tree species Accord, built to be a symbol of peace. Her lips curled, though there was no humor in it. Lasted about 6 hours. Xerwind's neural filaments tightened. He knew this story. Every Xerion did. The Accord had been a desperate gamble, an attempt to unite 3 warring factions under a single banner. The humans, ever the mediators, had proposed the ship as a gesture of trust, and then the Vecthar had betrayed them. They ambushed you, Xerwind murmured. Oh, they tried. Vala ran a hand along the engine's scorched surface. Problem was, they didn't realize Wed built the olive branch with a few modifications. Ursek's fronds flared in sudden understanding. You expected betrayal. Vala's smile was razor thin. We planned for it. The truth unfolded in Xerwind's mind like a tactical schematic. The humans hadn't just built a ship. They'd built a trap. The moment the Vecthar opened fire, the olive branch systems had rerouted, not to shield itself, but to channel the attack. Every energy blast, every torpedo had been absorbed, amplified, and flung back with pinpoint precision. By the time the dust settled, the Vecthar fleet was scrap. The Xerion contingent had fled, and the humans had walked away. You turned their treachery into your weapon. Xerwind breathed. Vala shrugged. We're good at that. Ursek's voice was hushed. And the Accord? Dead, but the lesson stuck. Vala's gaze hardened. Now when we offer peace, we do it with a knife in our other hand. Just in case. Xerwind stared at the ruined engine, its fractured alloys a testament to human ingenuity and human ruthlessness. They didn't just adapt, they engineered adaptation into their very bones, and suddenly, he understood why the galaxy feared them. Not because they were cruel, but because they were thorough. The wreckage of the Vecthar fleet still glowed in the void, molten debris cooling into jagged silhouettes against the stars. Xerwind stood in the observation blister of the Xerion command vessel, his emerald-hued skin flickering with the reflection of distant fires. The humans had not just survived, they had redefined survival. Ursek approached, his bioluminescent veins pulsing erratically, betraying the scientist's unease. His tendril, like fingers, traced the organic console, its vine, like circuitry dimming, as if recoiling from the memory of what had transpired. They didn't just counter the attack, Ursek murmured. They weaponized the act of betrayal itself. Xerwind exhaled, his respiratory frills flattening against his neck. The humans had taken the Vecthar's aggression and spun it into a lesson. One written in plasma and shrapnel. A transmission flickered to life on the holo display. Major Vala's face appeared, her expression unreadable. Behind her, Sergeant Webb was stripping the casing from a damaged reactor conduit with his bare hands, his muscles corded with effort. The humans didn't wait for tools. They made tools. You're still here, Vala observed. Xerwind's spine stiffened. We are. Reassessing. She smirked. Good. Then you're ready for the rest of the story. The Olive Branch had not been the first human ship to turn an ambush into a massacre. Ursek's archival drones projected a grainy battlefield recording, an older conflict, one the Xerion had dismissed as irrelevant. A lone human cruiser, the Iron Resolve, had been cornered by 3 Accord destroyers. Outgunned, outnumbered, its shields failing. Then the humans did what they always did. They cheated. The Iron Resolve vented its own fuel reserves into space, creating a volatile cloud. When the Accord fired, The detonation ripped through their formation like a solar flare. The humans rode the shockwave straight into the heart of the enemy fleet. Their hulls scorched but intact, their railguns already cycling for the next volley. They used their own destruction as a weapon, Ursek whispered. Xerwind watched as the recording showed the cruiser's boarding pods slamming into the lead destroyer. Human soldiers, exo-troopers, their armor blackened and cracked, stormed the corridors with plasma cutters and shaped charges. They fought like demons, but worse, they fought smart. One trooper, his helmet shattered, grinned through bloodied teeth as he jammed a fusion charge into the destroyer's core. The feed cut to static. That was the day the Accord learned. Vala said quietly, "Humans don't believe in fair fights, we believe in winning." Sergeant Webb stepped into view, wiping grease from his hands. His sleeves were rolled up, revealing scars that mapped a lifetime of violence. "You Xers talk a lot about honor," he said. "But honor won't stop a bullet, won't patch a hull breach, won't keep your people alive." He tapped his temple. "Adaptation will." Xerwind's frills trembled. The humans had no concept of surrender, no concept of limits. They saw a wall, and instead of climbing it, they burned it down and walked through the ashes. Ursek's voice was hollow. "You don't just fight to survive, you fight to end the fight." Vala nodded. "And now you understand why the galaxy fears us. Not because they were monsters, but because they were efficient, and efficiency, it turned out, was the only universal language." The observation deck of the Xerion flagship Emerald Tide hummed with the soft rhythmic pulse of its bioluminescent systems, casting shifting patterns of lime and amber across the walls. The air smelled faintly of ozone and something organic, like crushed leaves after a storm. Xerwind stood at the panoramic viewport, his frills twitching in agitation as he watched the human warship Iron Resolve drift alongside them, its angular brutalist silhouette a stark contrast to the flowing vine-like architecture of Xerion vessels. Ursek approached, his four-fingered hands clasped behind his back, the bioluminescent veins beneath his emerald skin flickering with subdued energy. He had spent cycles studying the humans, dissecting their tactics, their psychology, their relentlessness, and yet, even now, he found himself unsettled. "They do not fight as we do," he murmured, more to himself than to Xerwind. Xerwind exhaled through his nasal slits, the sound a low, guttural hiss. "No, they do not." The humans had no doctrine of measured engagement, no sacred balance between offense and defense. They did not duel, they did not ritualize war, they optimized it. Ursek's mind flickered back to the battle footage, the way the human soldiers had repurposed their own wreckage into traps, how they had turned the Accord's superior numbers against them by collapsing entire sections of the station, burying their enemies in the debris of their own hubris. It was not cruelty, it was calculation. And that was what terrified him most. Behind them, the holographic display flickered to life, replaying the final moments of the Accord's flagship, Royer's core. The humans had not merely destroyed it, they had disassembled it. Boarding drones slicing through bulkheads, nanite swarms dissolving critical systems, exo-troopers surgically eliminating command nodes. It had not been a battle, it had been a deconstruction. Sergeant Webb's voice cut through the silence, rough and unapologetic. "You keep waiting for us to play by your rules." He leaned against the bulkhead, arms crossed, his scarred knuckles flexing. "We don't have rules, we have objectives." Xerwind's frills stiffened. "There is no honor in such methods." Webb snorted. "Honor's a luxury for people who can afford to lose." Ursek's pulse quickened. That was the heart of it, wasn't it? The humans could not afford to lose. Not ever. Their history was written in the ashes of civilizations that had underestimated them, in the wreckage of empires that had assumed they could be broken. And now, the galaxy was learning the same lesson. Vala stepped forward, her presence calm, deliberate. "You think we're reckless," she said. "But we're not. We're precise. Every move, every sacrifice, it's all measured, all for the sake of one thing. Victory, Xerwind said, the word bitter on his tongue. Vala shook her head. Survival. The silence that followed was thick, charged with the weight of revelation. The humans did not fight for glory. They fought to ensure there would be a tomorrow. And in that moment, Ursek understood why the Accord had fallen. Not because the humans were stronger, but because they had nothing left to lose. The command deck of the Xerion flagship Emerald Tide hummed with the low organic pulse of its living systems, the walls breathing faintly with bioluminescent light. Xerwind stood motionless, his emerald-scaled hands resting on the smooth vine, like railing of the observation platform. Below him, the holographic display flickered with the aftermath of the battle, the wreckage of Accord warships drifting in the void, their once proud hulls now shattered by human ingenuity. Ursek stood beside him, his neural tendrils twitching with unprocessed data. The human words still echoed in his mind. Survival, not conquest, not dominance, survival. It was a concept so primal, so alien to the Xerion way of thinking, that it left him unbalanced. The Accord had fought for control, for order, for the preservation of their carefully constructed hierarchy. The humans fought simply to exist, and that made them unstoppable. Across the deck, Major Vala stood with Sergeant Webb, both of them watching the same display. Their postures were relaxed, but their eyes were sharp, calculating. Ursek had seen that look before, in predators assessing their next move. "Your solution," Xerwind said at last, his voice a low, resonant vibration. It was not merely a tactic. It was a philosophy. Vala didn't turn. Every war we've ever fought has been about the same thing. The strong try to erase the weak. The weak refuse to be erased. She gestured to the wreckage. "You thought you could break us by throwing bigger guns at the problem. But we've spent our entire history figuring out how to make bigger guns irrelevant." Ursek's neural tendrils coiled tighter. The humans had done what no species in the Accord had ever dared. They had sacrificed their own advantages to render the enemies meaningless. The Accord's superior shielding, useless against human boarding tactics that bypassed it entirely. Their fleet coordination, disrupted by swarm drones that moved like living things, slipping through their formations like shadows. Their overwhelming firepower, neutralized by human ships that let themselves be hit, only to reveal they were nothing but decoys, luring the Accord into traps. It was madness, it was brilliance, and it had worked. Webb chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "You guys kept waiting for us to fight fair. But fair fights are for people who plan on losing." Xerwind's crest flared in agitation. "And yet, you do not celebrate." Vala finally turned, her gaze steady. "We don't fight for glory, we fight to end fights." The silence that followed was heavier than the void outside. Ursek understood. Then the humans had not come to prove their strength. They had come to remove the need for it. And in doing so, they had changed the galaxy forever. The observation deck hummed with the soft, organic pulse of Xerion bioluminescence, casting shifting emerald patterns across the walls. The war was over. The Accord had surrendered. Yet here, in this quiet chamber between stars, the true battle still raged, not of weapons, but of understanding. Xersek's neural frills twitched as she studied the human soldier before her. Sergeant Daniel Webb sat with the relaxed posture of a man who had survived 1,000 nightmares and no longer feared the dark. His hands, scarred and calloused, rested on his knees, fingers occasionally tapping in absent rhythm, some human habit she didn't recognize. "They do not celebrate." The thought unsettled her. Victory was meant to be exultant. The Xerion Dominion had sung hymns of conquest for millennia, their warriors basking in the glow of triumph. But these humans, they carried their victories like burdens. Webb's gaze flicked to the viewport, where the remnants of the battle still drifted, twisted wrecks of Accord warships, their once proud hulls now broken and dark. Ursek followed his stare, her own mind replaying the battle's final moments. The Accord's last stand had been a masterpiece of desperation. Their flagship, the Eternal Dawn, had unleashed a final, cataclysmic energy surge, a weapon designed to obliterate entire fleets in a single strike. The humans had known it was coming, and they had let it hit them. Ursek's neural frills stiffened at the memory. The human vanguard, dozens of ships, had deliberately positioned themselves in the blast's path. The Accord had roared in triumph, believing they had won. Then the truth had unfolded. The ships were empty. Hollow shells, packed with nothing but sensor, reflective plating and automated thrusters. The real human fleet had already slipped past, emerging from the radiation shadow of the decoys like specters. By the time the Accord realized their mistake, it was too late. Webb exhaled, rubbing his temple. "Waste of good ships," he muttered. Ursek's frills rippled in confusion. "You sacrificed them." "Yeah." Webb's voice was flat. "Better ships than people." The words settled over the room like a shroud. Xerwind, standing rigid near the chamber's pulsing bio, Node finally spoke. His voice was low, the harmonics of his native tongue strained with something unfamiliar, something like dread. "You do not fight as warriors. You fight as survivors." Major Vala, leaning against the organic arch of the doorway, didn't look up. "Warriors fight for honor. Survivors fight to live." Ursek's mind reeled. This was the heart of it, the terrifying core of human strategy. The Accord had waged war with the expectation of rules, of limits, of a battlefield where certain lines were never crossed. The humans had crossed every single one, and they had done it without hesitation. She thought of their boarding drones, swarms of them, tiny and relentless, slipping through the Accord's bio. Shields like parasites. She thought of their cybernetic shock troops, soldiers rebuilt from the dead, marching into plasma fire without flinching. She thought of their ships, designed not for elegance, but for endurance, their hulls layered with armor thick enough to shrug off weapons that would cripple a Xerion vessel. And then she thought of the final, chilling realization. The humans had held back. They could have annihilated the Accord entirely. They had the means. Instead, they had dismantled their enemy piece by piece, surgically, until surrender was the only option. Not conquest, not vengeance, prevention. Ursek's frills trembled. You do not wish to rule." Vala's lips twitched. "Rule." She shook her head. "We just want to stop this. The cycles, the whole damn galaxy tearing itself apart, over and over." The silence stretched, thick with the weight of revelation. Xerwind's crest flattened against his skull, his bioluminescence dimming. He looked old. "And if we refuse?" Webb finally turned to face him fully. His eyes were dark, unreadable. "Then we'll be back." The words weren't a threat. They were a promise, and for the first time in her life, Ursek understood true fear, not of death, but of the thing that would endure beyond it. The silence in the Xerion command chamber was thick enough to suffocate. Bioluminescent veins pulsed erratically along the walls, casting shifting emerald shadows over the gathered commanders. Xerwind stood motionless, his frills pressed flat against his neck, his mind racing through the implications of Webb's words. Then, "We'll be back," not a threat, a promise. Ursek's fingers twitched against the smooth vine, like surface of the tactical console. The data streams flickered, ship signatures, weapon yields, casualty projections, all rendered meaningless in the face of the humans' restraint. They had chosen not to obliterate the Accord, not because they couldn't, because they wouldn't. And that was the most terrifying realization of all. Across the chamber, Major Vala watched them, her stance relaxed, but her eyes sharp. She didn't gloat, didn't sneer. She simply waited, as if she already knew what their answer would be. Xerwind exhaled, the sound a low, organic hiss through his respiratory vents. His people had fought for cycles upon cycles, locked in the same brutal dance of conquest and retaliation. The Accord had been their answer, a way to impose order, to control the chaos before it consumed them all. The humans had shattered that illusion in a single campaign. He turned his gaze to the holographic display, still hovering above the console. The remnants of the Accord fleet drifted in disarray, their once proud formations broken. The human vessels, indomitable class dreadnoughts, they called them, loomed like silent sentinels, their armor scorched but unbroken, their weapons cold but ready. They had not fired the killing shot. Ursek's voice was barely audible. "You could have destroyed us." Vala didn't flinch. "Yes, and you didn't." The simplicity of it struck Xerwind like a plasma round to the chest. No grand speeches, no demands for submission. Just stop. He had seen the reports. The human soldiers, those exo-troopers, had breached Accord strongholds with terrifying efficiency, yet they had taken prisoners where they could. They had disabled reactors instead of detonating them. They had spared ships that surrendered. It made no sense. Unless the humans weren't fighting for dominance. They were fighting for peace, a concept so alien it left his mind reeling. Webb shifted beside Vala, his augmented frame a silent reminder of the cost of war. His voice, when it came, was quiet. "We've seen what happens when cycles like this go unchecked. We've lived it." His gaze flickered to the scars along his own arms. "Faint, but there. We don't want that for you, or for anyone else." Xerwind's frills twitched. They mean it, and that was the horror of it. The humans weren't conquerors. They weren't even warriors, not in the way the galaxy understood. They were preventers, a force that stepped into the fire not to claim it, but to put it out. Ursek's bioluminescence dimmed further. "What do you want from us?" Vala's lips quirked. "Same thing we've wanted from the start, an end to the fighting." She gestured to the display. "Your call." The weight of the moment pressed down on Xerwind's shoulders. He could order the remnants of the fleet to regroup, to fight to the last. He could force the humans to prove their resolve. But he had seen enough. His crest lifted slightly as he exhaled, the tension bleeding from his limbs. "Stand down the fleet." Ursek's frills flared in surprise, but she didn't argue. She simply nodded and relayed the command, her voice steady. The holographic display flickered as Accord ships powered down their weapons, their energy signatures fading from hostile yellow to dormant green. Vala watched for a moment, then turned to Webb. "Told you they'd see reason." Webb snorted. "Took him long enough." Xerwind didn't bristle at the casual disrespect. He was too busy grappling with the enormity of what had just happened. The war was over, not because they had been crushed, because the humans had let them choose, and that, more than any weapon, was what would change the galaxy forever. Ursek stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "What now?" Vala smiled. It wasn't cruel, wasn't triumphant. It was hopeful. "Now," she said, "we talk." And for the first time in cycles, Xerwind felt something unfamiliar stir in his chest. Not resignation, possibility. The humans had won, and somehow, impossibly, so had they.